Better late than never, Jared. Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to welcome you all to the December Marine Fish Advisory Commission meeting, today being December 17th, 2024. Introductions and announcements. Part of DMF staff, well, myself, the director, and Nicola Meserve, we were down in Alexandria yesterday, so I'm sure Dan and Nicola will talk about that or mention it. So I'm going to move on to review of December 2024 business meeting agenda.
Ray, we need a roll call attendance first.
Okay.
So Bill Amaru.
Here.
Bill Doyle.
Here.
Chris McGuire.
Good morning, here.
Khalil Bogdan.
Here.
Ray Kane.
Here.
Shelley Edmondson.
Here.
Suki Sawyer.
Yeah, morning. Good morning.
Good morning. Tim Brady.
Here, good morning.
All right, Ray. Good to go.
Good to go. Review of the December 2024 business meeting agenda. Has everybody reviewed it? Is everybody good with it? And do you need a vote on this, Jared? Or is that on the November?
If there are no edits, we do not need a vote on the agenda. We can just
Any changes to the agenda for today, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen?
Not seeing any, Mr. Chair. We can proceed.
We can proceed. Review and approval of the November draft business meeting minutes. This we need a vote on, right?
Correct. We need a roll call vote.
Roll call.
And a motion.
Any edits to the November meeting minutes?
Not seeing.
I'll make a motion, Ray.
Suki, thank you.
I'll second.
Who's that? Bill Amaru?
Yeah, that's Bill.
Thank you.
I'll call the roll. Bill Amaru.
Yes.
Bill Doyle.
Yes.
Chris McGuire.
Yes.
Khalil Bogdan.
Yes.
Shelley Edmondson.
Yes.
Suki Sawyer.
Yes.
Tim Brady.
Yes.
Unanimous.
Thank you. Thank you all. Moving on. Who's on for law enforcement, Jared?
We have
Jack Chapin.
Jack Chapin and Matt Bass.
Is Matt on? I know he had something going on, but he might come in a little later on.
No, I am on. Yeah, my appointment got canceled.
Oh, okay.
Postponed.
All right.
The floor is yours, gentlemen.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Not a lot going on from the law enforcement side this last few weeks. Hunting season, of course, everyone's involved with that. I believe we had a couple of right whales, some right whales in the area, but I believe they've moved on. There were a couple humpback, basically two dead humpbacks, I guess, in the southern area, Martha's Vineyard to Westport and Brewster, but I don't believe there's any entanglements associated with them. Other than that, don't have much to add. Matt, do you have anything to add to that?
No, that I do not.
Thank you,
Anything from the
gentlemen.
group?
Questions for law enforcement? Do any
Not seeing
members
any
have questions?
Mr. Chair.
Are there any questions for law enforcement from the members of the commission?
Not seeing any.
Thank you, Jared. Moving along. Director Dan McKinnon, you have the floor.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Chairman Kane. We've got some interesting developments since we met last. First is the derelict fishing gear bill. If you recall, Bob Glenn presented to the commission, I think about a year or so ago. If you remember, Bob chaired a task force that included Mass Lobstermen's Association, Center for Coastal Studies, Mass Environmental Police, DMF, and members of this commission. And they the group produced a paper to highlight the issues about the law as written and the problem of marine debris and specifically on derelict fishing gear. And so from that, there was some proposed statutory amendments, and I'm pleased to report that those statutory amendments were accomplished since our last meeting in November, thanks to the work and support of Bruce Tarr from Gloucester. And there was a little bit of a hiccup where one word was changed, but we were able to get that fixed in a sub budget. So the bottom line is we have new language that allows us, DMF, and the commission to regulate the issues concerning abandoned fishing gear. In the past, abandoned fishing gear was given a whole lot of protection back in the day. There was wooden traps that were commonly coming ashore during storms, and for good reason, the legislature created laws to protect that gear from being taken off the beaches. But today, what comes ashore is usually a mangled mess of crushed plastic coated wire, and so this statute sets us up to do some regulating on this issue. But what it does is it distinguishes something called fishing gear versus fishing gear debris. And fishing gear is basically gear that's intact, and fishing gear debris is the alternate state. And it's going to allow us to dispose of that as well, and also remove gear from closed areas. So, like for example, the 3 to 3.5 month closure we have in state waters for lobster gear, any gear that's left behind there, we can remove now under this under this premise that that's considered abandoned gear. So we're really excited about it. Kudos to Bob Glenn for seeing that to the end, as well as all the other participants, like I mentioned before, the MLA, CCS, the EPOs. So we'll be coming back to you over in the next few months. We're going to reconvene the team and talk about like what regulations make sense, and we'll bring them forward to you in the next couple of months for final action at the regulation level. I have an update on the clam plant. Many of you may have seen the Boston Globe. I've asked Jared this morning to distribute an article. The Boston Globe can be a little challenging in terms of the paywall, but one of their premier writers, David Abel, wrote an article on the dilemma that DMF is having with the depuration plant because of declining throughput at the plant. The amount of clams going through that plant is off by almost 95% over the last 20 years. And furthermore, it could get worse with the reclassification of waters that are fairly productive soft shell clam waters that up till now have been in the classification status, which requires depuration. But in the area around Hingham and Hull, there's an opportunity to reclassify those, meaning you won't have to bring those to the plant. So this on top of a very unfortunate storm event last Thanksgiving, a year ago Thanksgiving, where we lost the saltwater wells. For a year, we've been advising the department and the secretary and others that we think the function of that depuration should be terminated because of the declining throughput and the fact that it takes so many full-time employees to man it. So at this point, the governor has agreed with us that that's the plan going forward, and we'll be working with DCAM to turn the building over to the state or the DCAM. DCAM is the Division of Capital Asset Management. It's the state agency that holds all facilities, and we'll be working with them for someone to use that facility or whatever. Well, I'm not sure what will happen with the facility. At this point, there's a lab that we are using still because it is a certified lab by FDA. And so we still have some of our lab folks that are in that part of the building, but we don't intend to try to turn the water back on. We haven't had well water for over a year, so this seals that fate. So anyway, if you have a chance, please, read that article. We'd be happy to answer any other questions you might have on it. On the personnel side, we're on the verge of, or recently have hired a set of new staff. The one that's probably most germane to this group is the communications specialist. Remember, Julia Kaplan left us last spring, and then we had a hiring freeze over the summer, fall. So that's one that I know Jared is very anxious to get refilled, because Jared's been doing double duty in his own analyst work, as well as doing a lot of the administrative work, like preparing minutes of the meetings. We're also hiring or have hired some new right whale focused positions with some of the congressionally appropriated money. We've got a science lead, we've got an acoustician, someone who's going to study all of the collection of sounds that are coming. They're going to come in with our array that we're working on developing with the other states, and as well as a spatial data analyst. And then there's a shellfish restoration specialist, and those interviews are going on now. And last but not least, the offshore wind specialist. We should have that person on board next month. And we just finished those interviews last Friday, and no decision's been made yet. Permit renewals are now live. This is the first where you can actually renew your permit online. This is a big deal in the evolution of permitting. The use of that technology is pretty groundbreaking. Anna and Story have been working on that diligently with some of their staff, and we can take some questions on that. And then finally, another accomplishment that I'm really pleased about is the striped bass plate, which was started 5 years ago, is finally seeing some revenues that we're going to be able to spend. And we have an advisory panel set up through the Mass Environmental Trust. We're convening them on Friday, I believe. Maybe it's Thursday or Friday this week. And there's over 2,000 plates that have been sold. So the revenues from that plate will be about $50,000 a year. So we're working on a list of projects, and we'll be passing that in front of a panel of outside experts that we've convened, as well as some inside folks. The idea there is not to, use that money for normal DMF functions, but to try to do, new projects and new initiatives, and, give the plate buyers, some confidence that their money is going to striped bass and river herring conservation. If you've seen the plate, there's a striper, and right above its mouth there's a couple of river herring. So both of those topics would be germane to the spending of this funds. So those are my comments. We have a lot of business today and a lot of presentations to go over. It's going to be really a massive effort over the winter in terms of public hearings. Looking forward to that. And there's a lot of great information, all the handouts that we've forwarded. So Ray, I'll stop there. If any of the members have any particular questions on that handful of things I've just gone over.
Questions for Director McKiernan?
Bill Amaru.
Bill, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Dan. This is not something you just said specifically, if you have anything to ask about the points you just went over, but I have a question about something you didn't go over. Is it appropriate? It's only going to take a minute or two.
Sure, go ahead. Yep.
Okay, so I just found out today that the ASMFC has decided to continue the closure on the Gulf of Maine shrimp fishery. Understandably, the resource is in terrible condition down in our area. But there is a statement that the states of Maine, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts will be putting together a bit of something I guess we could call a sentinel fishery, where they'll be going out and doing some experimental tows to try to calculate what the abundance is. And the three states would be getting together to decide how they would conduct the fishery. Have you got any information for us on that, Massachusetts position on that?
Yeah, great question. Is Glenn on?
Bob's not on yet. No, he had a morning
Okay.
conflict.
And Ray, you were at that meeting as well.
Yeah, so
Ray,
they were given an RSA of roughly 26 or 27 tons. 4 specific areas, which are the same areas that were used in previous RSA for northern shrimp, 2 vessels per area. Now Maine's got to go out in a public forum and ask for people who want to go northern shrimp fishing in this RSA plan. And Megan has informed us that Maine will not be ready to issue these letters of, I guess they're comparable to letters of authorization to the 8 vessels until the end of January. So the fishery won't start until February. And most of the harvesters like that idea. They said that's when they're most abundant, the northern shrimp, the adults, February and March.
Yeah, so there we have for Maine, but where's Massachusetts in this, Dan? Have you got a process?
Where's Massachusetts on this? Well, according to Bob Glenn, there were a couple of inquiries and then they never got back to DMF.
Yeah, so I
Bob
believe the Massachusetts vessels would be able to participate if
Right.
interested, and I'll have Bob reach out to you, Bill, and because I know that you, I mean, from my early days at DMF, I know that you and your son were prominent.
Yeah, there were 6 of us out of Chatham. I mean,
Yeah.
we're the only one that has a net on a boat anymore of that group, but
Mhm.
there are other ports. I thought maybe Gloucester, Rockland, Plymouth. It's, the guys have to be aware of that there's a potential for this experimental or this monitoring fishery, and maybe there'll be a handful of guys that would do it.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, so I just
Yeah,
wanted to bring it
so
up.
that would be Maine, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts,
Right.
Bill. That's
Right.
why the 3 states
Right.
are on that northern shrimp section.
Right. Okay. Well, I wanted to bring it up. I did, and hopefully there'll be a few people listening that may get the word out, and you might be hearing from some of them.
And remember, this RSA bill, financially, it's on the boat owner. No funding from ASMFC.
Yeah. No, understood.
Yeah.
Well, there's so little money to be made in pulling a net around a boat right now, anyway. But anyway, we just wanted to bring it up. It was a wonderful fishery. We may never see it here again the way things are going. I think we all know why, but it's worth following, and I wanted to bring it up. Thank you.
Thank
Okay.
you, Bill.
Khalil Bogdan.
Khalil.
Thank you,
You're right.
Mr. Chairman. Just a question for the director. Dan, I believe you said that the license plate meeting was on Friday. From
Yeah.
what I have, it sounds Thursday.
Yeah, you're right, Khalil. It is Thursday.
Just so the folks in the public know.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Khalil. Any other questions for the director?
I'm not seeing any other hands raised, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Jared. Let's move on to action items. Election of the Marine Fish Advisory Commission Vice Chair and Clerk. Has anybody got a nomination or nominations?
Khalil Bogdan.
Khalil, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to simplify it, I'm going to make a motion, and then without having a discussion beforehand, then I'll make the motion, and then if there's any discussion, we can discuss it after the motion. I move to nominate Bill Doyle for the open position of Vice Chair of the MFAC. And I move to nominate Shelley Edmondson for position as clerk for the MFAC.
I'll second it.
Okay, we've got a motion on the board. Any discussion?
I'm not seeing any hands raised.
So let's do this the easy way. Is there anybody on the commission opposed to Bill Doyle being vice chair and Shelley Edmondson being?
Mr. Chair, on any action item on virtual meetings, the vote must be roll call.
All right, Jared, the floor is yours.
Bill Amaru,
Yes.
Bill Doyle,
Yes.
Chris McGuire,
Yes.
Khalil Bogdan,
Yes.
Shelley Edmondson,
Yes.
Suki Sawyer,
Yes.
Tim Brady.
Yes, congratulations.
Unanimous, Mr. Chair.
Congratulations, Mr. Doyle and Shelley Edmondson
Thank you, Ray.
as new vice chair and clerk.
Thanks,
So
Ray.
we can,
So
what's that, Shelley?
I just said thank you.
You're welcome. Let's move this along to the 2025 period one in-season adjustments for summer flounder.
Ray, Jared's going to present on this, but just as an introduction, this action taken today is our us using the mechanism that we have under the in-season adjustments to modify trip limits in the short term. We intend to go to public hearing and, come like winter to make permanent changes to our regulations. But as you recall, this commission and the director have the opportunity to change things or to fine tune them in season using this process. And if we had more time, I would like to see kind of a permanent change to to these particular rules, but this is a mechanism that we can use. Now, that the fluke quotas have gone down dramatically from just a few years ago. And we held a meeting with the industry back in November to try to come up with a more appropriate or receiving ideas about amendments to our times, places, amounts, and seasons, etc. And so, but today we're going to vote on amending the wintertime fishery. But I just want to say that I am interested in making some of these rules a more permanent change to the CMR. So Jared, take it away.
Okay. Thank you, Dan. So, just to reiterate what Dan's point, this is a narrow vote on just amending the period one summer flounder trip limits, period one being January 1 through April 22nd for 2025. This is an in-season adjustment that will just be in effect for this coming year. Later this winter, we'll go out to public hearing with a more robust set of proposals affecting the regulatory program for this fishery moving forward, including the period two fishery and more permanent changes to the period one fishery, including trip limit reductions and allocation adjustments. So what we're proposing today for 2025 is to reduce the trip limit from 5,000 pounds to 2,000 pounds. And the purpose of this is to slow the quota consumption rate to achieve a longer season, and in doing so, reduce the risk of a quota allocation overage, i.e. the fishery taking more than its allocated 30%, reducing the availability of quota to the period two fishery. Last year, the 30% allocation was taken, or we projected the 30% allocation would be taken in early February, resulting in almost 5 weeks of fishing, or just about 5 weeks of fishing. We'd like to see that quota available for a longer period of time throughout the period one season. Our trip limit would be similar to that for Rhode Island. Rhode Island's going to a 4,000 pound bi-weekly limit. And other neighboring states, New York and Connecticut, have smaller bi-weekly limits. New York's 1,400 pounds, and Connecticut is 600 pounds. As part of the in-season adjustment process, we take public comment on the action. The public comment we received was supportive of the action, and generally from recreational fishers who are concerned about the state of the Nantucket Sound, Vineyard Sound, summertime recreational fishery. And as Bill Amaru commented as well, in support of this adjustment. As part of that process, we also, during the period one fishery for the past several years, we've authorized what we call the multi-state program. And that allows a vessel that is permitted in multiple states, either Massachusetts or Rhode Island, Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, to come into Massachusetts in possession of more than our trip limit, offload our trip limit, and then proceed to the next state to offload their limit, and so on. This was done, back, I believe, around 2020, 2021, when the quotas were elevated, and it was done to create more efficiency in targeting those quotas during the wintertime period when this fishery is occurring almost exclusively in federal waters where there are no trip limits. And to reduce, discarding by that fleet. It was generally supported by the states who were involved. And as this has evolved, as this program has gone on, and particularly with the quota reduction last year, we've become concerned that it's likely contributing to the early consumption of the period one quota. And we're also concerned about the lack of symmetry in the state permitting programs, whereby very few of our vessels are authorized to land in other participating states, whereas vessels from those states, particularly Rhode Island, may land in Massachusetts and account for a sizable amount of our period one limit. So we see that this is contributing to early quota consumption without our state permit holders really benefiting from being able to participate. So with that in mind, we're not going to authorize that program for this year. That doesn't require a vote of the commission. That's just at the discretion of the director. But for informational purposes, that's not what we're going to do for this year. We're going to go back to a situation where the state limit that we approved today as part of this in-season adjustment will be the trip limit, and a vessel coming into Massachusetts ports will not be able to possess more summer flounder than the state trip limit, even if they're only offloading that state trip limit. If that quota ends up being underutilized because the combined effect of these two actions is such that it constrains access to the period one allocation, then that quota will be reallocated to the period two fishery. And we're generally supportive of this happening. And in fact, we're looking as part of this winter's public hearing process to allocate more of the overall quota to the period two fishery, because we believe it's more beneficial to allocate that fish to the season when more of our commercial fishers can take advantage of it, and when the fish is more valuable in the market. Moreover, there's long-standing precedent for that reallocation to occur in many years. Dating back in the history of this fishery, we've underutilized the period one allocation. Only in the last few years has more and more of that fish been taken. So today we need a motion on the recommendation to approve the in-season adjustment to reduce the period one trip limit from 5,000 to 2,000 pounds for 2025. And I'll take any other questions on summer flounder management.
Well, first, let's get a motion on the board, and then we'll open it up to discussion, Jared.
All right.
Would anybody like to make a motion?
I'll make the motion.
Thank you. Who's that, Bill?
Yeah,
Bill
Bill.
Amaru. Yep.
Thank you, Bill. And a second?
Khalil here, second.
Thank you, Khalil. Motion on the board, open for discussion.
Bill Amaru.
Bill, you're recognized.
Thank you, Jared. It's a good plan. It's timely, but I want to express my concerns, despite being in favor of it. One of the things that this is going to lead to, inevitably, also with the increase in alternative fishing away from groundfish, which we were on the cusp of entering with the new regulations on cod for the 2025 season. Now, that particular part of the plan isn't going to be affected in this fishery, but starting May 1st, when the new groundfish year starts, and the very, very small quota managed cod and other fisheries go into effect, we're going to see a shift in effort that's going to be unprecedented, in my opinion, in New England groundfish fishing. This fishery will end up becoming a major part of the fishery for the trawl fleets of our area, Massachusetts specifically. And I want there to be close attention paid to what bycatch discards are occurring in this fishery down the road. I think now with virtually all groundfish trips monitored by observers, the information should be readily available and it should be accurate. And the reason I bring this up is because it could be pointing to an abundance of fish that simply is not being given credence by the stock survey teams when they allocate and come up with our quota. I think that the drastic cut we saw between 23 and 24 was uncalled for. We saw fishing, both trawl and hook and line, that was equal to the year before, when the quota was twice as much. The resource did not appear to be hurting. There did not appear to be a lack of small entry fish into the fishery. And I'm very concerned that a bycatch discard problem could occur in this, and there's nothing worse. It's been historical in my career. Every time we've done something to try to protect something else, we ended up destroying fish in the process. And I don't want to see that happen with this wonderful fishery, these terrific fish. Fortunately, they're rugged fish. They can survive quite a bit of handling as long as they're returned to the water quickly. But I'm not sure how fast that happens on an 80-footer. I know we could do it on a 45 or 50-footer pretty quickly. So those are my only concerns, but we had to do this, and it makes sense. And I think the result will, in the end, will be a positive one. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Bill. Anybody else? Questions or comments on the motion?
I'm not seeing any further questions, Mr. Chair. We can move this to a roll call vote.
By all means, please do.
Bill Amaru,
Yes.
Bill Doyle,
Yes.
Chris McGuire,
Yes.
Leo Bogdan,
Yes,
Shelley Edmondson,
Yes.
Suki Sawyer,
Yes.
Tim Brady.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. Thank you, commission members, for being as responsive as possible. Items for future public hearings. False albacore and Atlantic bonito limits. Who's got this, Dan?
Yeah, I'm gonna take this one, and I'm sure staff will speak up. This is a really interesting one. It's unprecedented, but it's a follow-up to the September conversation that we had when we met in Kingston, and we had a whole suite of what we call hardtail fishery participants, and that's the bonito and false albacore. So in essence, this fish has become increasingly abundant off Massachusetts. Obviously, because it's a warm water species, I think what we're seeing is the effect of ocean warming, and Massachusetts, while it's always been a prominent state in relative to the harvest or the catch of these two species, it's becoming increasingly so. And it also is important for the recreational fishing community, given the decline in both striped bass and bluefish. This is a very, very popular fish to chase. And I think we heard some interesting anecdotes at that September meeting about, possibly some strange directed fishing going on with folks using jet skis and mother ships, and it all sounded very very surprising to me. But we have also been requested over the years to step up and conserve the species in some capacity, especially in those years when we had a preponderance of very small bonito that we got reports and saw a lot in the social media realm of anglers catching buckets of these and treating them, just as bait, almost like a mackerel. In fact, many people confuse them with mackerel, the young of the year bonito that can be caught by hook and line and used as maybe lobster bait or even bait for larger fish. So at this point, we debated internally whether to consider a size limit, but I think a bag limit would actually effectively accomplish our goals. And my goal would be to constrain the development of any commercial fishery for this, and come up with an easy to enforce rule. Now, most anglers can tell these two species apart, but in the event that someone couldn't, we thought that if we went up with a a bag limit for both species combined, it would be kind of a smart regulation that was easy to follow. So we're proposing a 5 fish per person possession limit for those two species combined. Now, folks do catch bonito for personal consumption, not so much the false albacore, but they do retain them in the case of tournaments. It's a very, very popular fish to chase, especially among the fly fishing community. So the memo is fairly succinct. We've brought back all of the graphics in the back of the memo as an appendix so you can see those again. One update that we have relative to what we presented to you in September is that the wave 4 catches of bonito and false albacore and this is mentioned in the memo, is not only an all-time high, but an all-time high compared to other years in totality. So this fish is here, and I don't think necessarily 2024 was an anomaly. I mean, it's my educated guess that we're going to see more of this going forward, and there is a strong constituency for conservation. There is no interstate plan, there is no federal plan, but given the prominence that we have and what I think is an appropriate need for building, conservation ethic, that's going to be the theme on striped bass as well. That to sort of cherish the fish because they're not in great shape, but in this case, these stocks are not stressed. But I think given its position, in the mix for the recreational community, there's a lot of desire to be conservative with this fish, and I think it's appropriate at this time. So, it's a short recommendation. I know in past meetings we've also learned that occasionally there's like folks who are doing mackerel jigging may run into some of these, and I'd be certainly willing to have some kind of an exemption, for in the event that these fish come up, and on occasion, like I mentioned before, looking like mackerel, acting like mackerel. So we don't want to turn mackerel fishermen, into criminals because these fish can be come on the boat fast and furious, and sometimes they're difficult to tell apart. So why don't I take some questions? But that is our proposal. We'd like to take it to public hearing in the early winter, or as soon as we can get clearance from above. So I'll stop there and take any questions.
Pardon me, Director McKinnon, would you be kind enough to explain wave 4 to the commission members?
Oh, sorry. Good call, Ray. The recreational survey that interviews anglers, the year is broken up into 6 2-month periods, and so wave 4 is the 7th and 8th months, July and August, and so that would be wave 4. Now, I believe it would be wave 5 that would actually we'd expect to have some of the highest catches, because those are the months locally where our temperatures peak. So the fact that we're giving you this information about wave 4, I'm sure wave 5 is going to spike as well. So that is wave 4. Thanks for that clarification, or for that request.
Thank you, Dan.
Yeah.
Questions for Dan?
Chris McGuire.
Chris, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to Dan and the DMF staff for taking a big step forward here. I think this is a really good opportunity to put some guardrails around what I think is a really important fishery for private anglers and for charter for hire captains. I was wondering, I was interested to hear that you guys discussed a minimum size limit and then decided to not bring it forward. I do appreciate the idea of making things simple. And on that line, it seems like you could have a a 16-inch minimum size limit, which would be the same. It's basically the L50 for both of those species. And I wonder whether or not it would be useful for just gathering public input to have that as an alternative to just see what people think about that. I noticed in the figures that were presented, it looks like the false albacore catch is largely greater than 16 inches, and the bonito catch, there's a significant percentage that's under that 16-inch threshold, and I think that's probably the place where, as managers, we should be paying some attention as well. So anyway, I would be supportive of sending out to public meeting an alternative that was a 16-inch minimum size for both species, and see what people think.
Good call, Chris. Director?
Yeah, certainly, I'd be willing to do that. When we first looked at this, we were thinking that the problems was those episodic years where there was a ton of small fish in the sort of if I look at this chart here on for bonito, it would be in the 8 to 12 foot, I'm sorry, 8 to 12 inch range, those really small young of the year. And because that didn't happen every year, we wondered, is there what is the problem? If that problem doesn't present itself as routinely as just the potential, directing on this fish, an escalation of fisheries. And that's why we thought, well, even if folks took some small fish, if they were limited in the number, that it might solve the problem and be a little more elegant. Like we could even go lower. I mean, that's the other thing we might want to consider is right now it's 5 fish, but we could consider a number like 4 or whatever, or even lower. But because we've already spent some time on this and we are presenting to you length frequency data, I'd be perfectly happy to add that to the public hearing proposal.
Thank you, Dan. Questions for Dan on false albacore and bonito limits?
Bill Ammer.
Bill, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Excuse me. I've been trying to fend off this cold for weeks. Yeah, this is a good plan. I do want to emphasize the potential exemption aspect of it. It's going to not only it's going to need an exemption for the directed jig fishery for mackerel, and one has to remember that the larger boats and the more productive boats are using a computerized system that automatically brings the fish aboard the boat, dehooks them, and they drop into a trough, and they then go down towards wherever they're going to end up, either in a large box or individual box. So being able to monitor exactly what is coming over to find this limit is going to be problematic. The idea, though, is that mackerel fishermen move around a lot anyway to find the concentrations that they want to work on. So it is possible for them to move away from an area where there's a lot of mixing going on, and there is, generally speaking, these fish travel together. So it's possible for them to work within the limits, but they do have to be given an exemption to allow them to possess a lot more than 5 individual fish. And remember also that in this type of fishing that we do with these ceviche type hook rigs, you're getting generally small fish. The 16, 17, 18-inch fish are pretty good size fish, and oftentimes they're quite a bit smaller. So there's going to have to be some wiggle room in there. And I think you'll get that when you bring this to public hearing. You'll be hearing from the fellows that are still doing this fishery. Well, those are my comments, and I'm very happy to be able to get out ahead of this, as Chris had said, and act the way we'll be acting to preserve this fishery for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Questions or comments?
Chris McGuire.
Hello?
Yeah, sorry. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Just one thing I meant to say about the mackerel fishery. I think having a carve out for the mackerel fishery is good. And I just like to support just as DMF thinks about how to do that, I appreciate what Bill said about the fishermen moving around a lot. And, you know, if we look at what did for many years, work with the sea herring fishery to, you know, collect the data to encourage a move along. And there was a high incidence of catch. I think that's like a good terminals while encouraging that on when there is still
Yeah, you're
a
broke up,
good
Chris.
middle ground there.
Chris, you're broke up. You might want to move your.
Sorry, I'm in our to that.
Couldn't make out anything he just said.
Well, Chris,
Exactly.
if I could paraphrase, you're interested in, and if you look at the memo on page 2, you're interested in us maybe instituting a small allowance as bycatch with the expectation that boats that are fishing on mackerel, should they start to see exceeding that, they would move along.
Yeah, sorry, I'm in the car. Can you hear me now?
No,
No.
Oh,
Yeah.
Boring.
Okay.
so
What the director said was right.
I believe, Dan, he's referring to river herring, where they have to move along SMAS. Did that study. David Bethany oversaw it.
Yeah.
Out of SMAS. I think that's what Chris is referring to with the move along.
Yeah.
With
And I think the second to last paragraph of the memo kind of captures that. So
Right.
we'll incorporate that into the oral public hearing proposal.
questions or comments for the director on this? Jared?
not seeing any other hands raised, Mr. Chair.
Once again, I'd like commission members to know that a commissioner from a sister state came to me at yesterday's meeting and applauded DMF for bringing this, recognizing these two species and trying to implement some regulations. So I just wanted commission members to know that DMF was applauded once again by a sister state. So we can move along. Constraints on shore-based angling activities to limit white shark interactions.
Raymond, now I'll open this and turn it over to Jared and Greg Scomo. I think Greg is with us. So,
Great, Dr. Scomo's with us. Thank you.
yeah, so I hope commission members had a chance to not only read the memo, but mine into the link to an article that was published by the Provincetown Independent that was really compelling. If you read that article, it talks about the difficulty of having this directed shark fishery taking place amongst surfers. So it's challenging for so many reasons. And so we've discussed it internally, and we've come up with a few features or a few aspects of this as a proposal, which would be, an area-based rule, also a gear-based rule, and also a methods aspect of the rule. So I'm going to turn it over to Jared and Greg, and they can summarize what we're proposing.
Thank you, Director. Jared?
Greg, would you like to run with this, or do you want me to take it?
Go ahead, Jared. You can start. If they have questions, I'm happy to follow up.
Sure thing.
Good morning, Dr. Scomo.
Good morning, Ray, and the rest of the committee.
Commission.
Okay, so this proposal has several different elements to it affecting shore-based shark fishing and shore-based fishing generally. The first aspect of the proposal is to prohibit shore-based shark angling effectively on that coastline that is on the eastern shore of Cape Cod, as well as north of Cape Cod up to the New Hampshire border. That's where, our data indicates that you're going to most likely encounter white sharks. The one exemption we've carved out there is for the 3 bay system, Kingston, Plymouth, and Duxbury inside the Gurnet. where there is a small seasonal recreational sand tiger fishery that we wouldn't want to constrain, that's occurring inside in the inner bays where we wouldn't expect to see white sharks. We don't have data to indicate that white sharks are present. We'd also continue to allow shore-based shark angling on the South Cape, the islands, where there have been historic recreational shore-based shark fishing activities for non-white shark species that we wouldn't want to restrict in this. So what this is, and then we define shore-based shark angling as both the use of a baited hook with a hook size of greater than 8/0 and a metal leader attached. That's based on a Jeff Kneebone study as to the predominant gear type used by recreational shark anglers. So this effectively prohibits shore-based shark fishing in areas where we'd expect to encounter white sharks may be encountered, as well as allowing or continuing to allow shore-based shark angling that is occurring for non-white shark species. What this is attempting to address is maybe a weakness in the existing regulatory structure that prohibits white shark fishing, but really it comes down to what is meant by targeting white sharks. And over the past few years, what we've seen is a growth in activity, particularly on the eastern shore of Cape Cod, of folks targeting white sharks, but calling it something else. So they're out there with, heavy gear, floating baits out past the surf, and saying that they're fishing for other shark species which aren't present in the area, or striped bass or bluefish where you wouldn't use that gear to fish for that. So it really comes down to enforcement of the current rule. Well, MEP has been successful in enforcing it. It comes down to intent, and much like we did with the Cape Cod Canal striped bass prohibition, it's just much more simple to call out the activity more directly that we want to constrain it. And that makes it easier for MEP to enforce and easier for folks to see and recognize what's going on and report it. Considering this is happening on, some pretty discrete beaches, around the state, getting that good information is critical to having MEP enforce it. The other aspects of this rule are a statewide prohibition on shore-based chumming, so as not to attract white sharks to the beach, creating a public safety risk, and to limit shore-based anglers from launching baits using, mechanized launching, and keeping that to casting only. We see this not only as an effective strategy for constraining targeting of white sharks, but also an effective strategy in striped bass conservation, because if it allows using these mechanized devices allows shore-based anglers to target fish that they normally couldn't reach on a cast, increases fight time, increases stress on the fish. And as we're moving into, really focusing on angler ethics and release mortality in striped bass, addressing this kind of has a dual purpose there. And I think the Provincetown Independent article that was linked in the memo does a real good job and it makes a real compelling case about the activities going on some of these Eastern Cape beaches and the conflicts that they're raising with this fishing activity and folks who may be surfing or beach going. And I think it makes a real compelling case as to why, we need to take action this year to better address this moving forward. Greg, anything you want to add?
No, I think you did a great job, Jared. I mean, shore-based shark fishing, just from a broader perspective, is really blown up on the east coast of the U.S. And social media is a lot of folks are pushing this through social media, and the highlight being how big a shark can you land from the beach. And here in Massachusetts, we have one of the few places you can actually, if you wanted to, target white sharks from the beach and bring in really big animals. A number of states are moving forward on shore-based shark fishing regulations. Most prominently, Florida and New York have implemented some. New Jersey is considering some. And I think ultimately it's something the ASMSC is going to have to take on. But otherwise, I think you covered it quite well.
Thanks. Just a couple things. Greg mentioned that Florida and New York have already taken this on. This is who we're modeling our program after, to some extent. Additionally, some considerations that we may hear at public hearing. Historically, there's been a contingent of shore-based blue fishermen who want to target the big blues using big bait. And, in that, we may be brushing up against that fishery with this prohibition, given hook size and the use of metal leaders. We talked to some tackle shops, and they don't sell a lot of that gear for bluefish fishermen anymore. They believe the activity is diminished, but we may hear about that at public hearing and want to consider a carve out to allow that historic activity to continue, in which case we might want to consider a minimum leader length to distinguish blue fishing from shark fishing. And also, folks, there has been some use of kayaks to deliver bait for shore fishermen, and maybe that's something we'd want to consider a carve out for as well. Dan?
Jared, did you mean a maximum leader length?
Yes, I did.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you. So I'll take questions and comments, Mr. Chair.
Questions and comments for either Jared or Dr. Scommel?
Khalil?
Khalil,
you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jared, is there a reason, why are the Plymouth, Kingston, and Duxbury Bays exempt? And why not just close, maybe because the white sharks aren't there, but why not close the entire coast of Massachusetts?
Sure. So we have historic shark-based fishing, shore-based shark fishing activities for non-white shark species that occur throughout the state, particularly along the South Cape coastline and another area, and the islands, and another area is the Three Bays, Kingston, Plymouth, Duxbury, inside Gurnett Point. Those are areas where we don't necessarily anticipate seeing a large amount of white sharks, given our data on shark movements, and there are areas where we see shark fishing for other species. So given that overlap, we don't want to prohibit that activity in those areas. Where we'd prefer to take a more refined approach and prohibit the activity in areas where we'd expect to see the sharks and where there is not historic non-white shark fishing occurring.
Thank you. Also, thank you for that. Another comment is that the local tackle shops may not be selling 8/0 or greater hooks, but they can be bought on the internet very readily, and more people are buying and purchasing items on the internet rather than going to the tackle shop, which is a shame because the tackle shops need the local business. But these hooks 8/0 and larger can be purchased on the internet.
Sure.
Thank you.
Questions for Jared, Dr. Scommel?
Bill Amaru?
Bill, you're recognized.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, thanks both to Greg and to Jared. I'm very much in favor of this, very much so. I can't say I feel very positive about a fishery that exists for the sake of being able to land a giant fish on the shoreline. To me, it equates with almost poaching of any of the large animals that live either on the African continent or here, even in North America. And to me, it's a cultural phenomenon that's occurred because of the internet and social media. It has nothing to do with the historical opportunities that have been provided to to Commonwealth citizens and other states to access the resources that the ocean provides us. This is something completely different, and it's a tragedy and a travesty on both the natural resource and the whole concept of fishing to provide food. A recreational fisherman generally fishes so that he can put something on the table that he won't have to buy in the fish market. And then there's a thrill involved in certain aspects of it as well, of course, understandable. But this is a created fishery that has no place in the historical record of our opportunities at sea. So I'm very happy to see this, and I hope that sooner rather than later it fades into the distance, like so many other homegrown cultural aspects of modern communications on the internet have. So I applaud the state for getting on this, and I hope it works.
Thank you, Bill.
Suki?
Questions?
Suki Sawyer?
Suki, you're recognized.
Yeah, thank you, Ray. Thank you, Jared. I just got, maybe I'm missing something. Is there a limit on, what's to stop a guy in an Mako from just fishing the surf line for great whites? Is that already eliminated? Did I miss that?
So no, I mean, you could still there's a lot more vessel-based fishing activity that's going to involve heavy gear, whether that's tuna or other shark species. And we didn't feel as though we needed to go that far. A lot of we have a prohibition on targeting white sharks to begin with. What this is trying to do is to better address the shore-based activity that poses a very discrete public safety risk as you're chumming and baiting these fish up onto the coastline where other user groups are accessing the coastline, whether it's beachgoers or surfers. And the kind of the spread of this trend on social media, we're really worried about more people coming to our state to do it. So it does intentionally leave that vessel-based component out of it, both because it doesn't present the same acute public safety risk and also because it becomes increasingly difficult to distinguish the activity once it's vessel-based because of the other species that may be targeted in a vessel, tunas and other shark species.
Okay, I just thought it was kind of weird that just because you couldn't cast off from the beach there, somebody in a little boat could be out there and right in the surf, same vicinity doing the same thing, and it doesn't make sense to me. Okay.
Billy
Question?
Edmondson?
Thanks, Jared.
You're recognized, Shelley.
Thanks, Ray. I have a question on the map that was provided in the memo. There's some areas that look like overlap between prohibited and allowed, and I just was a little confused. Maybe that's the resolution of the map, but like around Chatham and the Plymouth area, and I just wasn't sure what that meant.
So in the Plymouth area, the overlap you'd be seeing, and that is a resolution, is the seaward facing shore of Duxbury Beach and Gurnett Point and Plymouth Point. The seaward facing shoreline, that activity would be prohibited, but the inshore facing shoreline, the western facing shoreline of those points, it wouldn't be prohibited. So if you're fishing on the bay side, it wouldn't be prohibited as opposed to the ocean side where it would be prohibited. And that's basically distinguishing where a, recreational shark fishery for sand tigers may be occurring as opposed to a recreational shark fishery for white sharks. Around the Chatham area, it's the eastern shoreline, including all of Monomoy Island. And then beginning at Stage Harbor West would be where the allowed area is. Does
Okay.
that answer the question?
Yeah, that helps. And I guess it just might be good maybe having like a zoom in on those overlapping areas when it goes out to public comment so people can maybe see that. Maybe there'll be less questions. I don't know.
Sure.
it just got a little confusing for me.
Yeah.
But thank you. I support this.
Thank you, Shelley.
Questions?
Khalil?
Khalil, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Jared. Jared, what is the input from law enforcement regarding this, as far as patrolling and questioning folks that are fishing? Fishing, you know, it's very easy for someone to be out there with a 6/0 hook with the leader, steel leader, and say, well, I'm not fishing for white sharks. I'm fishing for the others, or I'm fishing for bluefish. What was the input from law enforcement regarding this possible new ruling?
Sure. So this recommendation or this proposal came out of discussions we had at our November law enforcement focus group meeting. And there was some interest in kind of enhancing the regulatory structure around this and support for this proposal as it was developed. I've worked that through. Lieutenant Colonel Baker and some of the area lieutenants. I'd let Matt Bass. I'd encourage Matt to speak more directly as to what his thoughts, but my impression was that there was general support for this.
Lieutenant Bass.
Yes, sir. No, totally agreed. We did have concern with the previous regulation, as that was the excuse we were getting. People were targeting something else. So refining some of those gear restrictions, delivery methods, and whatnot, I think is enforceable. And like Jared said, we work together to kind of refine some of the area language and where you can and can't. And I think we are in support of it.
And Khalil, there is a possibility that anglers would then move to a smaller hook size, but I think Greg, and you could maybe comment on this a little more, that's not going to be as successful in targeting white sharks once you get down into that 6/0 hook size.
Yeah, that's correct. You're not likely to be successful with probably any of the shark species other than dogfish using those smaller hooks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Khalil. Thank you, Dr. Scommel. Questions?
Well, not seeing any. Tim Brady.
Tim Brady, you're recognized.
Yeah, just a quick point, and I'm sure this has probably already been discussed, but I would support everything in this proposal, but also add, we have signage, I know, in the kind of white shark hot spots. I know in Plymouth, we have them at Whitehorse Beach. And I know they have them at the Outer Cape around Monomoy and Chatham, but adding, when this becomes a regulation, that we add to that signage about the presence of white sharks, that we maybe add this regulation to that the next time those signs are updated. Thanks.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Tim.
That's good advice.
Excellent.
Thank you, Tim. I had a question. I think we should incorporate short fin mako in this also. They are protected, if I'm not mistaken, right, Dr. Scommel?
That's correct. Yeah, it's a prohibited species currently, and that's like the other prohibited species. Most of the sharks taken from the shoreline here now. Makos are really very rarely, if ever, captured from shoreline. It's those are boat-based fishing operations, but most of our species are prohibited from retention.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Scommel. That was my question. Any other questions or comments on this proposal?
Not seeing any, Mr. Chair.
Well, let's move it along then. Thank you, Dr. Scommel, for attending with your expertise. We're going to move along to control recreational black sea bass season.
Yep, we're gonna have Nicholas speak to this. He had recently attended the Mid-Atlantic Council joint meeting with the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission on scup, sea bass, and fluke, and Nicholas has just a short update. This is probably the easiest one we've got today.
Nicola, you're recognized. Good morning.
Good morning, Ray. Thank you. I'm glad to take the easy ones. So we have just a proposal for a very small shift in the recreational sea bass season, similar to last year, shifting the opening date 1 day earlier so that it falls on a Saturday still. As in prior years, this requires a adjustment to the end of the season so that the harvest is expected to be equivalent. The reason that we're making this change, the background is that at the meeting last week, the ASMSC and the Mid-Atlantic Council approved status quo management for black sea bass as well as scup and summer flounder. In the case of black sea bass, there is a allowance for the small seasonal adjustments to be made through conservation equivalency. So as in prior years, that's what we're proposing. The for-hire industry in particular has been an advocate of that Saturday start. And I think it improves compliance and enforcement with the season to do so. So the other rules for the season will stay the same at 4 fish and a 16.5 minimum size. Moving into 2026, looking ahead a little bit, all three of the species that are managed collectively here, fluke, scup, and sea bass, we're going to get update assessments for all of them next year. So we'll be looking to set measures for 2 years for all three species in 2026 based on newest stock assessments that'll be done next year. While I have the mic, I would just note a couple other things on these species from the Mid-Atlantic Council ASMC meeting to flag for you. That involves some public hearings, upcoming public hearings, is that the board and council previously approved the recreational measure setting process framework and addenda. So right now we are using what's called the percent change approach to set the recreational measures for these three species. That approach sunsets after next year. So this addenda is proposing to continue that process or make some modifications to it. So hearings for that have been scheduled, and we have one for Maine, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts, an online public hearing on January 14th. And you can find the full, there's a link in the memo that provides the full list of public hearings. If you can't attend that one, you can attend any of the virtual meetings for other states as well. Also, at the last meeting, the board and council approved the scoping document to consider recreational sector separation for these three species as well as bluefish. So that's what's being scoped is recreational sector separation as well as data collection in the recreational fishery. So that's going to be looking at things like separate management measures for hire and private anglers, separate RHLs for them, as well as how to improve data collection. So whether that means private angler reporting or mandatory for hire reporting in all states, tournament reporting, those types of things are going to be scoped through this amendment, which will probably take a year or two to come to fruition. So that's it. But basically our proposal here is just to make that small seasonal adjustment.
Thank you, Nicola. Questions for Nicola?
Not seeing any hands raised, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So let's take a 5-minute biological break. We'll come back at 10:21. All right,
Sounds
Jared?
good. I'll pause the recording and put that up on the screen.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well,
So-
good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to reconvene this meeting. Hopefully you're all back at your monitors. Controls on use of conch pots in federal zone. Dan?
Yeah, this is an interesting one. Let me just give some introductory comments about governance and jurisdiction. In our fisheries management schemes, there are many species for which there may be state regulations, but an overarching federal plan in the federal zone. And it's the intersection of those rules that gets tricky, right? Magnuson Act, would require a state to have or prevent a state from having rules that could undermine a federal plan. This case is interesting because there is no federal plan for these whelks, and so what DMF is concerned about is our state waters fishery, which has been almost exclusively state waters, but over time now kind of bleeding out into the EEZ, and this sort of undermining our conservation strategies of permit limits and trap limits. And so we're proposing to require those who are coming into state waters or coming into our ports to follow the same regulations as those that might be fishing in state waters. And by analogy, this is how the Maine lobster fishery operates, in that Maine's regulatory scheme follows the vessels wherever they fish, whether it be in state waters or the EEZ. And that is a well-established legal paradigm. So I'm going to let Jared kind of talk about what the specific issues are, but we're very interested in extending our jurisdiction, or extending the authority of our authority onto the activity, which is predominantly in state waters now, but can go into the federal zone. And we think in some cases it goes into the federal zone for purposes of to avoid detection or avoid compliance with our rules. So, Jared, I'll give it to you to go over the specifics.
Sure. So you may recall back at the September meeting, we brought forth a first proposal on this that addressed both fish pots and conch pots, because we have been seeing in both our fish pot and conch pot fisheries of movement and fishing effort into federal waters. And for the conch pot fishery, we believe that's evidence of a depleted inshore resource. The vessels, as far away as Fairhaven and New Bedford are now fishing east of Nantucket in federal waters for conchs, and also longer seasons and bigger quotas for sea bass. We're seeing, we're getting reports of more sea bass fishing out in federal waters. But Bill Amaru and Shelley Edmondson at our September meeting, made a compelling case as to constraining our proposals on the fish pot fisheries, because those fisheries are subject to a federal plan and federal limited entry permitting schemes. We shouldn't be taking opportunities away from individuals who may have the federal permit from conducting otherwise lawful activities in federal waters. We also have trip limits that govern the amount of sea bass or scup that may be landed by those permit holders, and that effectively constrains the quantity of gear that can be set in the federal zone. For conch pots, we don't have a trip limit for conchs whelks taken by pot gear. So that may lead to unconstrained fishing effort without a trap limit, without a trap tag requirement, and without a limited entry permit for fishing this gear in federal waters. In state waters, we have a limited entry conch pot permit, we have a 200 trap limit, we have a trap tag requirement, and we have a season. Once you hit federal waters, none of those are required. You would only need a open entry shellfish permit to land that product in Massachusetts. And given that this is an area, the areas south and east of Nantucket are areas of moderate right whale use, we are concerned about entanglements with right whales and sea turtles and other large whale species, and the implications that may have for the broader Massachusetts trap pot fisheries. So as an initial step, what we'd like to do to control this proliferation of gear in the federal zone and the entanglement risk it poses is to apply all the conch pot rules that affect a state waters fisher to any Massachusetts commercial fisher setting conch pot gear in the federal zone. So that would be that you need to have a conch pot permit, that you would need to affix a valid trap tag to the gear when on board the vessel or set in state and federal waters, that you fish no more than 200 conch pots, that it's owner operator, and that it's closed annually from December 16th to April 14th. Whereas our initial proposal discussed applying these principles to the fish pot fisheries, we're going to pump the brakes on doing that at this time, given the other constraints that I talked about, the federal permitting, the state trip limits. We will issue a reminder this year to our permit holders, though, that for sea bass limits, the trip limit is permit based, not gear based. So if you do not have a state black sea bass pot permit, you're subject to the lower of the two directed fishery trip limits if you're fishing pot gear, and even if you're fishing pot gear in federal waters, because that trip limit is based on the permit held, not the gear type used. We really wanted to address gear marking and modification requirements as part of this proposal, because we are very concerned that this gear, that fish pot and conch pot gear used in federal waters is not subject under federal rules to the weak rope requirement. And the buoy line marking scheme for this requires 3 1-foot red marks, making it very close to the buoy line marking scheme for the Massachusetts state waters fishery, which requires 4 2-foot red marks. And this marking system for the federal waters gear is not just for those federal waters adjacent to Massachusetts. It's for all of the northern nearshore trap pot waters, which is basically that black checked area of federal waters that runs from the Maine Canadian boundary down to Montauk. So any non-lobster trap pot gear used in those waters is subject to that red marking requirement. And as you can see on the graphic next to that, that it's a fairly similar marking requirement to what's required of our state waters trap fisheries for lobster, conch, and fish pots. So, you know, if there is an entanglement, if an entanglement does occur, we're susceptible. There's a potential for misidentification of the origin of that, and it's defining that origin and determining where the entanglement is coming from and attributing it to that fishery is becoming increasingly important in the protected species management program. Unfortunately, to really dive into this, we would only complicate matters further if we were to start layering state rules on top of the federal rules. Effectively, the federal plan for other trap pot fisheries has not been updated since the new lobster trap rules on gear marking and gear modifications went into effect back in 2021 or 2022. And there's a bunch of remnant gear marking requirements in the other trap pot fishery rules that really complicate our ability to prescribe a distinct gear marking configuration for this gear. So what we want to do is work with NOAA Fisheries as they move to adopt new pot trap rules, other pot trap rules this coming year, which is not subject to the Consolidated Appropriations Act, which delays rulemaking until 2029. That's only for the lobster and Jonah crab fishery. So we believe that they're intending to address these other trap pot fisheries this year for 2026, and we intend to work with them and have begun discussions with them as to enhancing the gear marking requirements for these fisheries so that they're discrete and they can be distinguished from gear marking used in other fisheries, and to have the weak rope used in these fisheries, particularly in areas where there is substantial risk, like those northern hot trap waters. And we will be encouraging any Massachusetts fisherman who is moving this gear across that state federal boundary to continue using weak rope, given the entanglement risk associated with that. So, kind of a two-part issue here. First is moving forward with a proposal for public hearing this winter to manage the Kongpot fishery the same way in federal waters as we do in state waters. And then a second aspect of this proposal to work with NOAA to come up with gear marking and gear modification rules for the other trap pot fisheries in the northern nearshore trap pot waters, and come back hopefully for 2026 with enhanced and improved gear marking and gear modification rules for that fishery. So I'll take any questions.
Questions for Jared?
Not seeing any, Mr. Chair.
And I guess we can move this along. Commercial eel fishery and permitting.
Ray, as you know, we sit together on the American Eel Board of the ASMFC, and what comes up periodically is quota based management for the various states, and we tend to fall into sort of that almost de minimis status because our landings constitute less than 1% of of all eel commercial landings along the East Coast. I'm proposing to go to public hearing with some proposals to restrict access to this commercial fishery for purposes either to sort of minimize all this burden going forward for such a small fishery, or get the attention of the participants who may or may not be reporting. Some of the staff do have concerns that there may be some commercial eel fishing that goes unreported, especially given the potential to put these eels into the bait markets. And so even though the bait dealers would need to be primary buyers and report those, because that's how we accomplish our first order monitoring of the annual quotas, we do have some concern that may not be happening. But as you can see in the memo, there's very few people who have the permit who are using it for commercial purposes. If you look at the table on page 3, going back the last 10 years, only 7 individuals have sold any eels in any given year. And if you and only 3 in the last 5 years. And so, these numbers, and then on the other hand, it's possible to, I guess, take these for commercial purposes, but use them for your own commercial use, such as striped bass bait. But even that population is, or that doesn't really broaden the number of participants. It only goes from 7 to 9. So on page 2, page 3, the proposal talks about adopting a control date for this endorsement. Cease the issue of new endorsements beginning in 2026 to those that have a minimum level of activity prior to the control date, and consider making the endorsement owner operator and even possible non-transferable. Although I can be convinced otherwise. We certainly don't want to take away the opportunity for someone to make some income on selling of eels, but I think we need to get our hands on just how many are actually doing this. So I think this is going to get the attention of the participants. So that's our proposal. It's a control date. It's sort of the threat of a moratorium. I mean, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to have our staff working so hard to monitor a quota that is only about less than 1,000 pounds or 1 or 2,000. It's quite low. So I'm looking forward to getting these folks to turn out and work with us to figure out how to move forward with our eel fishery. I know Brad, I don't think Brad's on the call, but Brad does envision that it's possible that in niche markets and value added, that somebody could catch eels and make it into a good food product someday. But at this point, the reporting seems to be quite minimal, and there's a whole lot of permits being sold, and that's counterintuitive.
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, Dan, it had to be 15 years ago. We had a meeting down in the Bourne Public Library, a public hearing. And I think one eel potter was in attendance.
Yeah.
And I thought the numbers back then were like 1,600 pounds annually reported.
Yeah.
Does that sound right?
Yeah, I'm told that Brad might be in our virtual meeting. Brad, are you on?
Yeah, hi, Dan.
Yeah.
Good morning, Brad Chase. How are you?
Good morning, Chairman Kane. How are you?
So we're talking about one of your species that you oversee, eel fishery and permitting.
Sure, I'm happy to take any questions. I'll add briefly to Dan's comments that I think another part of this is that the eel fishery really dropped sharply in the 1980s in response to what I think was overfishing to a higher price that was offered by the European markets. And we really haven't seen improvement since then. And this is very concerning because the effort to catch has greatly dropped off. We've seen improvements in other diatomaceous fish in this time, but we're not seeing it with American eels. So I think the concern over underreporting is part of it. Also concerned about the stock status.
Thanks, Brad.
So question for Brad Chase.
Bill Amaru.
Bill, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Brad. Yeah, I have a couple of questions. One is under other considerations in front of me. It says reported commercial landings have been about 25,000 pounds per year. That's been contradicted by the conversation here at hand. And the value under $11,000. Those just don't make sense to me. I was involved in this fishery when I was a youth. Of course, there were a lot of deals around at that time. And in this season of the year, we speared them and sold them for very, very good money back in the 70s and 80s. So what's going on with under 50 cents a pound for what is being landed these days, when the historical fishery has always been considerably more than that decades ago? And also, I feel terrible about the decline in these large eels that we used to see around the pier at night, especially. They simply don't exist. And with the numbers, the hundreds and hundreds of seals that we have around our piers now, at least here on the Outer Cape, it's no wonder that they don't have a chance to recover. A great fishery once, very important for the Cape historically, now completely gone. Of course, the fisheries of the Cape are pretty much completely gone as well. People aren't interested in spearing eels through non-existent ice any longer. But I'm glad to see that this is coming along, and who knows, maybe someday in the future they may recover and come back. But anyways, it's a good plan. Just if you'd answer the question about the contradiction and how many pounds per year this indicates in the price of 11,000 for the annual catch. Thanks.
Thank you,
Nicola,
Bill.
did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, sorry, that's a typo on the slide. So the 25,000 pounds is around where the landing stabilized, like in the 1980s, early 1990s. Since then, they've decreased further, being less than 6,000 pounds since 1995. And there's a figure in the memo that shows, even the last 5 years, the landings are either confidential or they're all like below 1,000 pounds. So it really is that's just a typo on the slide there. They're considerably lower since then, and with a value less than the $11,000 is correct for the last decade worth of landings. It's below $11,000.
All right, now that makes sense. I got it. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Nicola. Thank you, Bill. Any other questions about this
Khalil?
item? Commercial eel fishery and permits.
Khalil Bogdan?
Khalil, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jared or However, the rationale, under the rationale says 2023 assessment. Is that coastwide or is that just Massachusetts?
Nicola or Brad, do you want to jump on that?
Yeah, that's the coastwide stock assessment by Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Khalil. Thank you, Brad. Any other discussion on this item?
Not seeing any, Mr. Chair.
Let's move it along. Paperwork requirements for possession and sale of dogfish fins.
Sure. So I'll take this one real briefly. I don't have a slide for it because it's pretty straightforward. This came out of the law enforcement focus group meeting back in November, and it's our existing shark finning law prohibits the possession or sale of shark fins in Massachusetts. Exempt from that are dogfish fins, both smooth and spiny dogfish. We do have a dogfish processing, seafood processing sector in the state. They do create this product. They fin the dogfish. Our understanding for talking to the processors is that product is then sent overseas and may be imported, further processed and imported back into Massachusetts for sale in ethnic markets. And what this is doing is just requiring paperwork demonstrating that this product was lawfully harvested dogfish fins and not other shark fins. Because there is concern that the exemption for possession and sale of dogfish fins can work to undermine the sharkfish finning prohibition. And there was an incident recently involving some shark fins being sold in Boston, and they went to process or to do genetic testing of those fins to determine whether or not they were shark or dogfish. And the genetic testing came back inconclusive, which may be attributable, which MEP thought may be attributable to some of the processing techniques, including the use of formaldehyde, which is repulsive for other reasons. But effectively, what we want to do is, if MEP goes into a market and finds a jar of shark fins, that market can either produce the paperwork saying, these are dogfish fins or lawfully caught, processed, and sold, or they're not, and it's prima facie evidence that it's a violation of the shark finning law. It simplifies the enforcement of it and moves us away from having to get product genetically tested, particularly if that product is going to come back inconclusive.
Questions for Jared?
I'm not seeing any, Mr. Chair. And just in closing, over the last 4 or so months, we've proposed a lot of public hearing items for you folks to consider that we want to go out to public hearing on this winter. As Dan said, it's going to be a busy one. So what this slide does is summarize what those issues are, so that you guys can keep that in the back of your mind. You'll see that there's 3 asterisk issues here. Groundfish and monkfish permitting and limits, striped bass management under commercial fishing. Those are both things that I think that we will get you a proposal at your next meeting. We're just, with the ASMFC meeting yesterday on striped bass and the council just wrapping up meetings earlier this month dealing with groundfish. We weren't in a position to get a memo to you this month on potential proposals there, but we will for your next meeting, which may be the end of January or early February. And then cod and haddock limits on recreational fishing. Those might need to be done by emergency rulemaking, depending on how the federal process plays out. Irrespective of that, our timeline moving forward is to hold public hearings in late February or early March That should say likely to host 2 hearings, one on the North Shore, one on the South Shore, probably Gloucester and Bourne or Gloucester and Plymouth. And then we anticipate getting final recommendations back to you by late March or in early April, and then an implementation goal of May 2025. So I just wanted to kind of put all these in one place so that you folks know what we will be addressing at public hearing this winter. And there's probably some pretty marathon public hearings.
Yes,
Yeah, it'd be
thank
good
you,
to
Jared.
forward this to the commission after
Yeah.
the
Thank
meeting. Yep.
Thank you, Jared. And I would encourage commission members, like if they're on the North Shore in Gloucester, I would encourage commission members up that way to attend these public hearings. And also south of Boston, whether it be Kingston or Bourne or the Maritime Academy, I would encourage commission members to attend these public hearings. And I know Kevin will be more than willing to stipend you for mileage. So I've benefited a lot by attending these public hearings and hearing what the public has to say. And I just encourage all commission members, if they have the time, I realize you're all public servants, but if you have the time, please attend these public hearings. Anything else on that, Dan? I'm
No,
here
we can go
in
right
February,
into,
March.
right into ASMFC next, I think.
Okay, let's move it along. Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission Striped Bass Board Meeting. Nicola?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have an update about the meeting that you've referenced that occurred yesterday. This was a special meeting of the Striped Bass Management Board. I call it special because it was out of sync with the normal quarterly meetings of the ASMFC. It was a meeting that was requested at the October meeting when the board received the 2024 stock assessment. And that assessment had a projection in it that indicated using the technical committee's most likely scenario for the projection, it indicated less than a 50% chance of rebuilding by the 2029 deadline. So because of that, there's a provision in the FMP that says that during this rebuilding time right now, if the stock assessment provides a result that we have less than a 50% probability of rebuilding by 2029, the board can consider a board action to change measures. Board action refers to, a vote of the board without the normal addendum process in which a document would be developed and taken out to public hearings and then voted upon. So it was a more expedited timeline in order to respond to kind of late breaking news from the stock assessment. So the board received that information back in October and asked for the special December 16th meeting. In the interim, the projections that the board had were updated with additional data from 2024 and used to create a range of options for recreational season closures, recreational size limit changes, and commercial quota adjustments. And the technical committee presented a range of projections that showed anywhere from needing a 0 to 14% reduction being needed in 2025 to stay on the rebuilding trajectory and have that 50% probability of rebuilding by 2029. That range, of the projections results from the assumptions that you have to make in projections. The 3 main ones were, what is catch going to be? This year we only had partial year data to determine what the fishing mortality is in 2024. And then what is going to happen with fishing mortality in the years ahead leading up to 2029. There is an assumption that fishing mortality will increase next year to some degree because the last above average year class from 2028 will be age 7, and recruiting to the 28 to 31-inch slot limit along the ocean. So similar to what we experienced in 2022, there's an expectation that harvest and fishing mortality will increase to some degree next year. How much? That's very hard to say. And then what happens to fishing mortality after that strong year class goes through? There's some expectation that F will go back down again because the 2028 year class is followed by a string of poor below average year classes. So, this is the information that the board was grappling with, kind of a lot of uncertainty about the situation. But there was some opportunity for public input into the process, and there was a wide-ranging public sentiment from fishing is okay, we don't need to do anything, to you need to act in 2025, or we need to slow this down a little bit and be more thorough and initiate an addendum. So there were two main motions that the board worked on perfecting throughout the meeting and voted them up. I think what's notable is that there was not a strong, we weren't debating between status quo, do nothing until the next assessment, and acting. It was, motions that debated whether or not we should act for 2025 or 2026. So the motion that did prevail was one to initiate an addendum to look at some additional measures that would go into place in 2026. And in very similar type of things that the board was considering for board action, changes in the size limits or recreational seasons, changes in the commercial quotas. So essentially the board will be moving forward with an addendum. I expect that will probably be approved for public comment in May, then at the commission's spring meeting. Such that the full 2024 data through the end of the year can be incorporated into those projections. So we'll have another set of projections and most likely a range of possible reductions, or possibly zero. It's possible that 2024 catch could be low enough to suggest, again, as one of the projections did that we looked at yesterday, that no reduction is needed. But there may be other projections that say that some reduction is needed. So the board will be debating that through the addendum process, though, which will allow for more public comment and some additional consideration of, how potential recreational seasons are implemented, what kind of regions are used. There's ongoing debate about whether closure should be no harvest or no targeting. So all of that will draw out a little bit further throughout 2025 with the intent of having any needed new measures in place for 2026. On the next slide, you'll see the competing motion that would have moved forward with board action. This was focused on achieving a 9% reduction in the recreational fishery, a slightly lesser reduction in the commercial fishery of 5%. And it was basically looking at a way to implement some seasonal closures to achieve 9% reductions by region, and to try to get those in place by early next year to ward off some of the expected increase in fishing mortality next year. But ultimately, the board chose the addendum route. I think some of the main reasons for that, again, was just the uncertainty in the projections, compared to expected socioeconomic impacts. There was some concern about, how quickly we were needing to consider seasonal closures, a tool that, while, in place in, many other fisheries, when we think about it, fluke, scup, and sea bass all have seasons. It is a new management tool for striped bass, which, other than spawning type closures, it's mostly open seasons throughout the fishery management plan. And there was some concern about the lateness of action for next year, that there wouldn't be much opportunity for education and outreach to the angling public to improve compliance and enforcement. And then lastly, there's a lot of discussion about the equity of how closures are implemented, and that part of that has to do with no harvest versus no targeting considerations, and part of it has to do with just how the regions were aligned, and it's very difficult to have a regional approach that is truly equitable for every single state. But generally speaking, a state by state approach to season closures would result in a lot of differences, border to border across states, and have problems for compliance, as well as effort shifts to the if your adjacent state is open and your state is closed, then you would really erode the conservation benefit of closures. So that's why the regional approach is being considered, but it does have some perceived equity challenges. But so again, ultimately, we are probably going to have, I guess it'll be in the summer next year, where there'll be, public hearings about measures that may be needed for 2026. I'm happy to take any questions about the meeting. Fair to say, I think we're all still kind of digesting the outcome.
Questions for Nicola?
Khalil.
Khalil, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Nicola, early on, you mentioned something about partial data when making a decision, and I this was early on in your presentation. What did you mean by partial data?
2024. So the projections, use 2024 catch to estimate fishing mortality in 2024, and then we make certain assumptions about what fishing mortality will be in 2025 and moving ahead based on what 2024 is. So when the stock assessment was concluded, we only had recreational data through wave 3, so through June. And so there was assumptions made about what catch would be for the rest of the year. Overall catch is much lower in 2024 than initially expected. So that's a good thing, but there was still, we only have, and even now we still don't have the full 2024 data. So that's all I was referring to, is just that we don't quite know the results of fishing activity in 2024 yet. That factors into the projections.
Yes, Khalil, ASMFC will have wave 6 by the middle of February, and I think a lot of the board members wanted to see all 6 waves for 24, but that data will not be available on wave 6 because, as mentioned at the table by one of the members of the TC, they had just gotten wave 5 in, but they hadn't had time to digest and to look at that data prior to this special meeting yesterday. So the board wants to look at the 24 in its entirety, not just wave 2 and 3 or 2, 3, and 4. They want to look 2 through 6.
Thank you. I understand that now. Thank you. Another just a comment. It's a complicated. It really is a complicated issue. We not only have mortality through recreational anglers, mortality through commercial anglers. We have mortality due to young of year because of environmental issues, but we also have the bycatch mortality. Is there any data that about the amount of striped bass that are inadvertently, unintended consequently caught and killed through bycatch?
Yes, I don't have it before me, but in the most recent assessment, the recreational release mortality did come down a bit from the prior assessment, but it's about 40 or 45% of the removals are attributed to recreational release mortality. So that's the the 9% of all releases in the recreational fishery that are assumed to die. And then it's 1 or 2% of the total mortality is attributed to the commercial discard mortality. That's what's, you know, the input into the stock assessment, at least.
So the commercial, no, not commercial, but the lack of a better word, the draggers, when they catch a non-conforming fish or a fish that they're not non-targeted fish, those fish are reported to DMF or to the proper agency.
Commercial discards are estimated using tagging data primarily.
Yeah, Nicola, I posed that question to Max, and Max said he'd get back to me because I was curious to know how, well, not relative, but if these NEFOP observers are recording bycatch in the commercial fisheries, as Khalil referred to, the otter trawlers, as opposed to doing extrapolations or tagged stripers. Like, so Matt said he'd get back to me on that, but that question's been posed to me over the years. Well, what are the discards in the commercial fisheries, non-specific to striped bass, but striped bass are caught in the nets. So what are the numbers there on bycatch?
Yeah, I couldn't answer that question today, but hopefully between you and me, Ray, maybe we can get some answers for the next meeting.
Thank you. And Nicola, you did a stellar job yesterday. That board, you know, that whole act with Maryland, and Dan, you're vice chair at ASMFC. I went over to Bob Beal and mentioned to him, we've heard this from Maryland for what, the past 2 or 3 years, that by October, there's nothing that they can do for January because they've already distributed their tags. And Bob Beal turned to me and said, well, we've got them on record this time. So hopefully as vice chair, we could keep them on record. So when decisions are made for 26, that Maryland will in fact enact regulations on January 1 of 26. And we're not told once again that it can't, they can't do it. It can't be done. I found that upsetting.
Yeah.
I'm sorry I had to bring it up, but
I just wanted a couple of comments. So I think in my view, when the wave 4 data came out, and again, we talked about wave 4 early, so that July, August data came out and it showed that catch declined, not going to say unexpectedly, but more than the PC had predicted. I think it took the wind out of the sail in terms of the critical need for conservation, because the TC did another model run and said, well, if this mortality rate or this level of catch is the new normal, you really, you do have a chance to reach the target by 50% by 2029. So we wound up hanging on these wave numbers, which is just so challenging. And then, of course, wave 5 came out last Friday, but not barely did it come out. I mean, publicly, they mentioned it during the presentation. The TC chair mentioned it, and that number was also low. And so, you know, I really found it quite compelling when even the conservation group representative from Maryland wanted the addendum because he just thought that he needed more time to fix things in the Chesapeake. So if we were only voting on like another slot limit change, I think you might have had a better shot at pulling this off. But the complexities of enacting these rules by April 1st, where states would have had to have left the meeting and gone and negotiated like common rules. to me, I kind of saw this coming in the webinar when people, when the public was asking questions about disproportionate impact on a given state. So this is very challenging in order to go forward and find tools that are uniform and enforceable. And I think the biggest challenge for me is trying to wrap my head around closures when Maryland created this principle called a no targeting closure. In other words, you're prohibited from even catch and release fishing, and somehow law enforcement has to be able to decipher your intent. And I think everybody from the law enforcement side of the shop has urged the managers, to be, to not go down that road, because it creates an incredible challenge for them to prove intent. And so, so that's another level of complexity. It's one thing to have a no harvest closure where catch and release could still be enjoyed or whatever, but this no targeting stuff is it's way more complicated, and I don't think it's as forecastable or as reliable in terms of allowing that kind of activity or not. So that's the challenge that I see. We have a very narrow slot right now of only 3 inches. The TC has sort of intimated that they would like us not to change that slot so they can get a better handle on the selectivity of the fisheries. And so if you're not going to shrink the slot, you got to go with some kind of closures. And I think the challenge of getting closures enacted by April 1 were just too daunting. So anyway, but Nicola, you did a great job trying to initiate some action among your sister states and the sister delegations, and we'll keep working on this to do what's best for the fishery and for the stocks.
Questions for Nicola or Dan?
Khalil, did you have a follow-up question?
Say it again.
Did you have a follow-up question?
Yeah, yes, I did. Just a final comment. I'm in my 9th year on the commission, and if there's one thing that I've learned from a rookie when I first came in 2016, and I learned it quickly, that fisheries management is a very complex process. And I just, the elephant in the room for me is the 6 years in a row below threshold reproduction. It's not because we don't have a strong, or we don't have, I don't want to use the word strong, but not that we don't have a spawning biomass, but we do. If it weren't for the environmental conditions, biotic conditions, abiotic conditions, we wouldn't have this issue. And so the elephant in the room for me is the 6 years in a row below threshold reproduction. And I just hope that when people and folks who are involved with this, take a good hard look at it, that sometimes we might have to make a difficult decision. It's something that no one wants. It would be a financial decision also. The implications would be financial. But we might get to the point that we have to make some real hard decisions regarding the bycatch, the commercial and recreational take on the striped bass. I mean, I think we're getting to a point that if we have a 7th year and an 8th year and a 9th year, and I can't say we're going to have that, because these are the conditions that we don't, the environmental conditions, we have no control over that. But if it continues, people have to say how much longer can a species sustain trying to be managed regarding quotas, etc. It's a comment, and I thank you for allowing me to do it.
Thank you, Khalil. Any other discussion on this item?
Not seeing any other comments, Mr. Chair.
Once again, I want to compliment Nicola. I mean, she brought it to the table, and I thought at first a lot of people were receptive to her motion. They had different questions. Well, how can we implement it in our state? But the final action was the one that she read to you about an addendum process. So, and I think a lot of what Nicola brought up is going to have to be part of that addendum process and brought up in the addendum process. And I can only, Khalil, this is to you, I can only hope and pray that we can get something done through ASMFC in the addendum fashion so regulations can be in place for January 1 of 26. So thank you. Thank you, Nicola. Thank you, Dan. And we're going to move on. I guess Melanie, is Melanie on this call? New England Fishery Management Council updates.
I am, Mr. Chair. How are you?
Good morning, Melanie. How are you?
I'm doing fine. Morning, commission members. I do have a few updates for you from the December New England Fishery Management Council meeting, and I think Jared's going to run slides for me, thankfully. Thanks, Jared. So this is from the council meeting that took place the first week of December down in Newport, and I will say, the mood was pretty tempered by two final actions that resulted in some pretty depressed fishing access for both Atlantic scallops and groundfish. Next slide. So I'll jump right in with groundfish, and the main action was Framework 69. This is the package that sets revised fishery specifications for nearly half of the groundfish stocks. So the council made a series of decisions on overfishing limits, OFLs, and acceptable biological catches, those ABCs, based on a new series of management track assessments, both for the 4 new cod stocks, but also for American plaice, pollock, witch flounder, Atlantic halibut, Georges Bank haddock, and Gulf of Maine haddock. And then, of course, we had recommendations from the council's SSC, as well as the Transboundary Management Guidance Committee, that TMGC that helps with the shared stocks. So in this table, you can get a sense of some of the relative changes in the available groundfish sub-ACL. And that red circle highlights the 4 new Atlantic cod stocks: Eastern Gulf of Maine, Western Gulf of Maine, Georges Bank, and Southern New England, as well as Georges Bank haddock. We can't compare the cod stocks to previous limits because obviously we didn't have those stocks, but you can see that the 2025 catch limits, they're exceedingly low. There's just 4.1 metric tons available in Southern New England. And as I said before, Georges Bank haddock is also one I want to highlight. It's seeing nearly an 80% reduction in its catch recommendation. And there was a lot of concern expressed around that, the implications for the offshore fishery, because this was mainly driven by a model decision that significantly altered the scale for Georges Bank haddock. Next slide. So focusing back on 3 of the 4 new cod stocks at Eastern Gulf of Maine, Western Gulf of Maine, and Southern New England, those recommended ABCs result in a series of state water subcomponents that you can see in this table. And so if we look at that middle line for Western Gulf of Maine cod, the 2025 subcomponent is 20 metric tons, which is around 44,000 pounds. And that's right at the 3-year average of catch based on 21 to 2023. Next slide. So additional management actions that were taken in Framework 69 include adopting a recreational sub-ACL, no longer a catch target for Southern New England cod. And you can see in fishing year 2025 that that's going to amount to just 11 metric tons. You can consider the estimated catch in fishing year 2023 was 207 metric tons, and that was against a catch target, I think it was around 75 or 80 metric tons. The scallop fishery, we eliminated one of the triggers for the accountability measure, otherwise known as an AM. that would be triggered if the scallop fishery exceeds its Georges Bank yellowtail or northern windowpane sub-ACL annual catch limit. So now basically that AM is only triggered if the scallop fishery exceeds its sub-ACL and the total ACL is exceeded. What we eliminated was a trigger where regardless of whether the total ACL was fully utilized, if the scallop fishery harvested over 50% of their sub-ACL, then they would have been penalized. So that's been eliminated. And then the last thing I want to highlight here is the decision that the recreational fishery in southern New England cod will have 0 possession. Next slide. We also had to do some updates for the common pool again because of the transition to the 4 new cod stocks. And so that was updated, but basically utilized the same methodology laid out in Amendment 16. So you can see in the top table how the quotas will be apportioned across the 3 trimesters. The last column in the top table shows you what statistical areas would be closed when those quotas or if those quotas are reached. And that's basically aimed, those statistical areas were identified by where 90% of that commercial catch was taking place. And then in the bottom slide, you can see there was decisions made on common pool trip limits. And again, for southern New England cod, that's going to be a 0 possession limit. Next slide. So onto scallops, and that's a little bit better picture, but as I said, they too are facing lows in exploitable biomass. And this chart, if you focus on the orange bars, those represent the limited access fleet, and they account for the majority of landings in the fishery. So you can see a peak in 2019 that's been steadily declining as the fisheries faced basically poorer recruitment and loss of mid-Atlantic fishing grounds due to higher temperatures and disease. So specifications for 2025 that the council just finalized will result in just around 17 million pounds in predicted landings for the LA fleet. Across all the fleets, it's about 20 million pounds if you take into account the LAGC, Northern Gulf of Maine, and IFQ. Next slide. So this chart shows the various scallop access areas, and the majority will be closed in the next fishing year. The council elected to newly close the Elephant Trunk, which is that square in southern mid-Atlantic, and Nantucket Lightship region. Those closures were based on actually positive news that the recent scallop surveys have reported recruitment in those areas. So that's basically the intent of the closure system is to help protect those scallops and ferry them through until maturity. Only Area 1, thank you, Jared, and Area 2, those 2 green highlighted, green shaded areas, they will be open in the next fishing year. And this is where the limited access fleet will be allocated 1 12,000 pound trip to each area. And then the fishery will have 24 days at sea for use in open bottom. So there were other management decisions also in Framework 39. There were 2 key timing changes that were made. The opening day of scallop access area fishing will be delayed from April 1st to May 15th. And then a seasonal closure in scallop access area 2 will now run from November 15th to May 15th, a 6-month closure. And both of those timing changes seek to improve scallop yield, focusing access to times of higher meat yield. The seasonal closure is also focused on reducing flatfish bycatch. It would prevent vessels from fishing in access area 2 during the highest flatfish bycatch months. This is especially targeted on northern windowpane flounder, which has been what has been triggering the scallop accountability measures of late. Next slide. All right, moving on to the Northern Gulf of Maine management area, which is that gray shaded area that runs from the 4220 north. The council approved a set aside of nearly 700,000 pounds for the upcoming fishing year. For comparison, this year's set aside was 420,000 pounds and it was harvested in just under 3 weeks. Next slide. So the last thing I do want to highlight for commission members is that tomorrow there will be a research track assessment community engagement meeting. The Scallop research track is ongoing. I would encourage those interested to attend in person. It'll be held at the Waypoint Event Center in New Bedford starting at 10. There is a virtual option, and you can go onto the council's website to get further information on that. Next slide. All right, so finally, December council meetings is always where we approve our next year's work priorities, which the council did approve the 2025 work priorities as recommended by the executive committee. They're going to focus on basically a required tasks, you know, those specification settings and stock assessment support, all those regulatory turns of the wheel that we have to do. And then these council initiatives that are going to be funded through the Inflation Reduction Act, IRA, which is what is highlighted in these tables. There is both a memo and a table on the council's website if you want to go through these in further detail. And I think that's it. Jared, if you go to the next slide, I think I just have questions for that. Yep, that's the high level summary for you, Chair.
Questions for Melanie?
Bill Amaru.
Bill, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Melanie. Well, I alluded earlier in this discussion to the fact that we're approaching a new paradigm in fisheries activity in the Georges groundfish fishery, and here we have it placed before us. My question is, what happens when the ABCs on cod are reached very early in the season? Melanie, was there any discussion about exactly how the commercial dragger and other gillnet longline commercial fisheries are to be conducted when there will be no opportunity for the landing of any additional fish? Is every codfish that will be caught with the gear used to catch other fish going to be discard mortality? Exactly how do they expect the fleet to function during this time? I think when I was on the council, we at one point prohibited the use of gear capable of catching fish where there was a complete moratorium on or a prohibition on landing them.
Mm-hmm.
What exactly are we going to do?
I mean, Bill, unfortunately, I think you're going to anticipate my answer that, I mean, depending on which sector we're talking about, right? Whether it's the sectors, the common pool, or recreational, the basic answer is, you know, fishing has to stop in whatever stock area. And the council was, you know, well aware that these are incredibly impactful, scary numbers. Unfortunately, we all felt like we were just backed into a corner by the science, and that actually leads me into something else I'll highlight, that there's been ongoing concerns and questions regarding some of the science that runs into not just groundfish but others, and I'll highlight. I would expect a letter to be going out shortly from the council to the Science Center to try to help advance some improvements on that, but it's not a satisfactory response, I know, for the industry this year. You know, the sector system is going to have, you know, those managers are going to have their job for them this year, trying to make sure that every cod counts and that they're not hitting up against those. The common pool, as I highlighted in that slide, yeah, they're going to face a closure. I mean, they've faced those already. Recreationally, as you saw, it's already decided for Southern New England. It's zero possession. We're going to be deciding Gulf of Maine measures or we're going to be providing recommendations to the regional administrator at our January meeting on the Gulf of Maine stocks, that usual process. So that will come back to us at the state for our rulemaking. But yeah, I wish I had a better answer for you, but I don't.
Okay, I know. And we're just going to be entering a whole new way of trying to make a living at sea. I mean, I'm still involved in the groundfish fishery. I have family members involved in it, and everyone is going to be looking for something and somewhere else to fish. And I've tried to bring that forward in our discussions about fluke, and it'll happen in other fisheries as well. but.
Yeah, I think, Bill, the other thing I want to maybe highlight just in terms of the longer term picture, not just focused in groundfish, is that with these IRA funds that I mentioned, there's a lot of looking at whether it's being driven by climate change or what we're just facing with the quotas, at how to be more resilient. And so one of those projects at the council level is looking at the permit suite. And I think that kind of gets at one of your points. It's like, if cod is prohibiting other stocks, how do we make better use of those stocks? So there is some look to see how we can recognizing the paradigm shift and that we need to make some changes in the long-standing management scheme.
Oh, I'm sure it'll happen eventually. Okay, thanks a lot.
You're
I
welcome.
can't imagine how difficult that meeting must have been, and thank you for doing a good job in presenting the information dispassionately and factually. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Questions for Melanie?
Dan?
Yeah, Melanie, you had a slide up there about the state water set-asides, and I recall that at our meeting in maybe August or back in New Bedford when commercial Gillnetter Chris Chadwick came down and he was asking to get some FaceTime with us and the commission to amend trip limits for next year for that state waters fishery, things like monkfish, whatever. We've put him off until after the council made their decision. So just as a reminder, we need to schedule that with Chris. So if you and Jared and I could get together, and we'll set up a meeting and with him and some of the whoever else is in that fishery and see if we can make any amendments to the state waters set aside. Obviously, we don't want to risk the cod situation, but some of the non-cod species, he's asked for that, so we need to schedule that.
Thank you, Dan. Any other questions for Melanie? Khalil, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Melanie, great job. Well, a question, Melanie. In your statistical formula, when you're plugging numbers in, for lack of better ways of expressing it, is there any part of that formula that you wish you had better data on?
Thanks, Khalil. Thanks for the question. And it's certainly not me plugging it in. There are, the stock assessment scientists and the council staff working on that. But yeah, there's a host of areas where not just gaps, but it feels like a degradation of the science, and one where Dan's had the agency step in and tried to assist the science center, and that's port sampling, just some of that basic length information. So yeah, there's several areas, and again, I will make sure to share the letter that is forthcoming from the council. I just want to let that get finalized before I give you any specifics on that. But we are going to be pressing on that, and if you want to join that conversation, you've been more than welcome.
Thank you, Melanie. Great job.
Thank you, Khalil. Thank you, Melanie. Well, I think we're going to move on to other business. Have any commission members other business to discuss? Not seeing any. I would like Khalil.
I have nothing. Oh, my hand should be down.
Thank you, Khalil.
Sorry.
Well, I would just like to close out the meeting, thanking DMF staff once again for their diligence on both the federal and state level. And I would certainly wish the entire commission and DMF staff a happy holiday, a Merry Christmas, and Happy Hanukkah. I'm going to move on to public comment. Jared, is there anybody on for public comment?
Anthony Frederick, you're recognized.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to make public comment. This is about the Albee and Bonito regulations. My name is Tony Friedrich. I'm the president and policy director of the Guides Association. We just want to tell all of you, the commissioners and the state agency, how much we appreciate this. as the striped bass population declines, our guides in your area depend more and more on albies and bonito. And I work with state agencies from Maine to Texas, and Massachusetts is a shining star of conservation. And this to me symbolizes it with these proactive measures. We can't thank you enough, our entire community, the businesses we support, for taking this into consideration. We really support y'all coming out with a host of options for public comment as well as a minimum size. I'll keep it really short. Thank you again to all the commissioners and all the people within the state agency that worked on this. There are a lot of people that appreciate it. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tony.
Beth Cassoni.
Beth, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This question is directed, Beth Cassoni, Executive Director, Massachusetts Lobstermen's Association. Jared, you gave a presentation and had a vertical line with red markings on it, and that's for the conch fishery, correct?
So, Beth, the Mass State Waters pot trap fisheries have the one large red mark in the top of the buoy line and the 4 2-foot red marks in the bottom of the buoy line, and that's for all state waters pot trap, lobster, conch, fish pot. Then the federal rules for other trap pot fisheries in the northern nearshore trap pot waters, which run from Montauk to Canada.
Yep.
That is 3 1-foot red marks in the buoy line. And then there are sub areas within that, such as Rhode Island State Waters, where there's an additional blue mark that needs to be on it. Or I think there's a Jeffrey's Ledge where there's a green mark that coincides with the red mark. So there are turns on that, but yeah, so there's 2 competing schemes that use the red mark. There's the Mass State Waters trap fisheries, and then there's this other trap pot fishery in northern nearshore waters, which runs from Montauk to Canada, that we're concerned about the overlap with.
That's right. And that was my comment. And I hope the state can work this issue out. I know Bob Glenn had brought this up initially when the Atlantic Large Whale Take Reduction Team made that recommendation. And we are very red sensitive in the lobster fishery. And if the state can work with the federal government to eliminate any red in the federal waters, that would be the best. And that's all I have to say. Thank you, everyone, and have a great holiday.
Thank you, Beth.
Thank you, Beth.
Ray Jarvis.
Good morning. Thank you for listening to me this morning, and I just want to thank the division and the advisory commission for their proactive measures with the Albee and Bonito proposals. I'm an owner-operator of a charter business out of Westport, Mass, and I do rely on both of these species to kind of fill the gaps where striped bass have began to dwindle, same with bluefish. So, you know, these fish do account for roughly 30 to 40% of the trips that I run here out of Westport. So again, I do appreciate you taking these proactive measures and having that conservation ethic just in general. And, you know, I am going to just keep it brief because I know there's other people that would like to speak. But thank you again, and I look forward to, you know, seeing a bag limit and quite possibly a size limit, you know, around that 5 fish, 16-inch size or so. Thank you again for your time, and everybody have a good day.
Thank you, Ray. Yeah, I failed to mention there's a 2-minute talk time here. So I'll recognize Mike Hogan next.
Hey, thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to comment on the proposed regulations for bonito and false albacore. I'm here in 3 parts. One is founder.
We're not hearing you, Mike.
Mike, it looks like you just froze. We'll come back to you.
Kyle Schaefer.
Fishing for
Hey, good morning, everybody. I just want to give you a huge slice of my gratitude for this opportunity to be proactive in fisheries management. I just can't thank everybody enough. And I know there's a lot of comments today, so I'll just keep mine very short. I'm absolutely in favor of an array of options here. It would be really great to just see how the public is reacting to this potential bonito and false albacore management option. And I would also support a minimum size limit. Would love to see a number of daily limits and also see the minimum size limit. And again, thank you guys so much for giving us the opportunity to speak up about this.
Thank you, Kyle. Are we back to Mike Hogan or are we moving on to Nick Jones?
We can go to Mike Hogan.
Hey,
Mike
folks,
Hogan, you recognize.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know what happened. That was weird. But anyway, thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to comment on the proposed bonito and false albacore regulations. I'm here in three parts. One is the founder, CEO of Hoagie Lure Company, headquartered here in Massachusetts. We sell directly to guides, anglers, independent dealers, and also big box stores here in the state. I'm also here's the publisher of Salty Cape, a Massachusetts-based fishing blog with thousands of readers. And then lastly is an angler who just simply enjoys fishing for bonito and albies. To keep it short, I'm just going to talk about 2 points here in voice of my strong support. Personally, I would love to see a range of bag limits on the table, say 3 or 4 or 5 fish with some sort of minimum size. I know from our data here at Hoagie Lure Company, albies are a fishery of growing importance. I heard Ray Jarvis before me, a captain of ours on our pro staff, mention that bonito and albies represent 30 to 40% of our sales. We have that in the data. We've also done a recent survey with our independent retailers throughout New England, but also the same data correlates to Massachusetts that 30 to 40% of sales, that number keeps showing up when I isolate it to Massachusetts.
Pardon me,
alone.
Mike.
Yep.
Yeah, we'll be having a public hearing on this. So we're trying to get through comments from everybody who's on this list.
Okay, I'll just sum it up saying that it's an important fishery to us, both from a business perspective and an angling community perspective. Lastly, I'd like to voice my strong support for continuing science. ASGA's science suggests that it's a single stock, and I deeply commend Massachusetts for taking the lead and setting a high standard for responsible management and conservation for all states that touch out false albacore and bonito. Anything we can do to support with continued science, you can count on Hoagie Lure Company in Saltwater and Salty Cape to support in any way we can. But again, I'd just like to thank you for hearing me. And, I applaud you folks for your science-based conservation themes and your proposed regulations.
Thank you, Mike. Nick Jones.
Hi, members of the commission. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, Nick, go ahead.
Excellent. I just want to keep my comments short. I just want to say thank you guys for the opportunity to speak. And I want to comment on behalf of the proposed regulations for albies and bonitos. I just want to applaud you guys for honestly setting the bar for all of the sister states in your area to see proactive measurements for such an important coastwide species. Thank you guys for these proposed regulations, and we look forward to what's to come with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Captain Terry Nugent.
Terry, you have to unmute yourself.
Yep. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
I can.
Okay. Captain Terry Nugent, I represent Riptide Charters. I'd like to start off thanking all of you for the opportunity to comment. Also, real quick, I'd just like to recognize Nicola for the work that was done yesterday. Unfortunately, things didn't quite go the way that maybe we all had wanted to, but her presentation and her motion was fantastic, well presented. The results were just not, maybe not what we would have liked. I'd like to speak on the albies and the bonito. I'm a member of Hoagie's Pro staff, a charter captain on Cape Cod. I've been doing it for 26 years there. Fortunately, I also fish down in North Carolina, another state that's been taking some proactive measures on albacore and bonito, setting some guidelines down there as well. But strongly in support of the false albacore and the bonito measures. It makes up more than 30 to 40% of my business. I travel and fish probably 60%, 70% for false albacore between the Cape and the Carolinas. So a bag limit, a minimum size would be fantastic. And again, I'm fortunate the two states that I frequent the most are the ones that are leading the charge to manage and maintain the species, especially in light of kind of what we're seeing with the striped bass and some of the other fisheries. So great job to all of you, and I have my strongest support behind you.
Thank you, Captain Nugent. Peter Jenkins.
There we go. Should hear me now. Yes, thanks for the opportunity to comment. Name's Peter Jenkins. I own the Saltwater Edge, a tackle shop in Newport, Rhode Island, and I'm chairman of the American Saltwater Guide Association. I also grew up on the South Shore of Massachusetts, spent plenty of time fishing on the Cape. And I want to commend you guys for the proactive approach, science-based approach. It's an awesome opportunity to have a clean slate. You know, having done the 5 hours rather on striped bass yesterday, it's complicated, and it's great to be able to start with the science and some of the data ASJ has gathered and some of what's still to come. So I'd like to see a minimum possession and a minimum size limit for sure. It certainly helps fill in my business because I would suggest it's also what Mike and Terry have said, around 30 or 40% of total. So, and that's really helpful as striped bass is in decline. And I'd also shout out Nicola and the team from Massachusetts as it relates to yesterday's efforts. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. And I'm sorry, I missed T. Edward Nickens. T. Edward Nickens, please.
Yes, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yep. Super. I am calling in from North Carolina. I am a contributing editor for Garden and Gun magazine and a contributing editor for Field and Stream magazine. And as of January, I'm taking over as editor-in-chief of Tail magazine, the fly fishing saltwater magazine. So thanks for hearing me out. Unlike some of these folks, albacore consume about 99% of my fishing heart. As we say down here in the South, I love these fish like Peter loves the Lord, and I am so happy to see that you folks are taking these proactive measures. I'm so happy to see that North Carolina has signed on in some respects as well. Definitely want to throw in my support for possession limits, for minimum size limits. Over the last 2 or 3 years, I've been astonished at the increase in fishing interest and pressure on both false albacore and bonito here in North Carolina. So I'm thrilled to see that there's some action taking place. I applaud you for your leadership, and I want you to know that anglers and fisheries managers up and down the coast, certainly here in North Carolina, are seeing what you're doing, and it's given us hope. So thank you very much for the progress so far, and look forward to more progress in the future.
Thank you very much. Rex Messing.
Hey there, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Hi, yeah, my name is Rex Messing. I am the marketing manager at Sims Fishing Products. I'm also a Newbury, Massachusetts resident, and I wanted to jump in and just offer my support for the actions that you guys are taking on the false albacore and bonito front. We really appreciate the proactive and precautionary regulations that you guys are suggesting. We feel like this is a really, really important subject given everything else that's going on in the New England fishery. We would love to make sure that there is a minimum size in place and the potential for bag limits. We'd love to see a range put up in place for public comment. There would also be of interest to see a potential breakdown of per boat capture versus per shore capture. But overall, just want to thank the board here for taking the initiative here and getting in front of this subject.
Thank you much, Rex. Moving on, Cody Rubner.
Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. Short and sweet for you guys. Part 1, fully support Albacore and Bonito efforts. Part 2, please hold the line on striped bass. And part 3, most important, recognize that what is being proposed and pushed right now for false albacore is not just a regulation. It is a cultural mind shift in how fisheries are managed. When you look at what everyone's talked about in the striped bass right now and how we get in that position, you don't get in that position by dwindling it down to rock bottom. Please continue to lead with proactive management and recognize that you guys are not only putting one measure in place, but shifting the culture for fisheries management. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you, Cody. And Jared, I believe that is the end of public comment.
That is, if you'd indulge me for 2 minutes, Mr. Chair, I'd like to discuss scheduling meetings for 2025.
Yes, by all means.
So a couple things, as we're moving forward with the rulemaking, portion of our year, we do need to keep that in mind, public hearing schedules and sequencing commission meetings with that in mind to get rules on the books for early May 2025. I'm thinking that that's likely going to require us to have a, mid to late January meeting this year. As well as likely a early March and mid-April meeting.
Fine.
So I'd be looking to schedule those and I'll reach out to folks about likely dates. We no longer need to be constrained to Tuesdays as the best day. That was something that Mike Peerdock had requested of us because it was the day with the least amount of conflicts with the New England Fisheries Management Council. Now, as Mike has left the commission, we can consider moving back to Thursdays or other days of the week. So I'll look to commission members to give me some feedback on that. And I'm thinking that based on some feedback that the commission members have given DMF, we will move to schedule these meetings in person, and we will move to a virtual format 48 hours in advance if we know there's going to be poor weather. I know we had discussed holding the commission meetings virtually in the winter to account for weather, but Dan and I have spoken about this, and we think that this is a better approach, is to schedule them for an in-person, only switch to virtual if there is a weather issue. We've heard the commission loud and clear on their preference to have these meetings in person. So we will accommodate that in that manner. And I'll look between the various DMF and Fish and Wildlife offices, as well as the public buildings that we've used in the past, such as libraries and town halls, to accommodate our meeting schedule.
How'd you do yesterday with your PT? Oh, for God's sake.
So that's all I have, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Jared. Well, you heard them, folks. We're going back to in-person meetings, which a number of you have requested, and there will be a weather cancellation 48 hours in advance where we switch over to webinar. So on Jared's last statement, I'm looking for a motion.
Are we looking for a motion to adjourn?
Yes, I'm sorry. A motion to adjourn. Do I get a motion to
I'll
adjourn?
make that motion, Ray.
I'll second.
Bill Doyle, seconded
Bill-
by Bill Amaru.
Bill Amaru,
Yeah.
and I presume nobody's opposed. Thank you all. Merry Christmas. Happy holidays.
Any salt, are you?
Thanks, everybody.